Welcome, everyone. Thank you guys for joining us for, I guess, the last Developers Insight session of the day. We fully understand what is scheduled right after this session, so we'll do what we can to get you out of here promptly. Today's session, Building Your Business on Samsung with OEM. We're going to spend quite a bit of time kind of talking about how Samsung is more than just an OEM provider, more than just the creator of some of the most innovative devices and technology that's in the market today. But from the enterprise and company perspective and the product development perspective, Samsung can act as a partner. So that's one of the main messages that we want to convey. I'll introduce myself. My name is Maurice White. I'm a senior solutions consultant. I work within our mobile business-to-business organization on our solution innovations and partnerships team. I know that's a mouthful, but we do some cool things. We get to work alongside of customers and partners as they look to build out solutions that tie into the powerful components of the Samsung ecosystems, including some of the things that we'll talk about today. I'll let our guests of honor introduce themselves. Jeremy?
Thanks, Mo. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here at this great event. My name is Jeremy Balkin, and I'm head of innovation for HSBC, one of the largest banks in the world. I'm based in New York. And part of my responsibility include the strategic partnerships with technology companies and fintechs and building out our exponential growth strategy to allow our customers to bank with us when, where, and how they choose.
Great. I'm Jim Willenbring. I'm a senior director for our digital health and patient operations team in one of the groups of Medtronic. So we're the largest medical device company in the world. And so I lead a number of really cool programs, both high-tech and high-touch. And so I'm excited to be here today to share one of those with you.
Awesome. Thanks again for joining us, fellas. As you can see, we do have some very cool discussions that we're going to be having today. So again, we thank Jeremy and Jim for joining us. So I'll go ahead and dive right in. As mentioned, the session is Building Your Business on Samsung with OEM. So what we're talking about is how Samsung can act as a partner with you as you go down the product development path. So let's talk about the challenges of developing a new product. Now, when I mention product, I'm referring to something that has a software as well as a hardware component. Software by itself can be a product, but for today's discussion, we're referring to something that actually has both components, something that literally requires device hardware integration. So when it comes to developing new products, businesses face unprecedented challenges. There's quite a few things that need to be considered with you as an enterprise if you're looking to build out a new product. One of the things you need to be thinking about is your deployment. Are you going to be deploying your product globally? If so, then you definitely need to be considering voltage requirements, right? The fact it remains is that there is tons of voltage requirements that span across the globe, 110, 220, 127, 115. Is your device, your product going to be deployed in Asia? Is it going to be deployed in Europe? Is it going to be deployed in Africa, here in the US, on varying islands? Then you need to be thinking about the voltage requirements. You need to be thinking or making sure that the hardware partner that you select has already accomplished its goal, and make sure that the devices that you are looking to build as part of your product has the modulation and regulation logic that's required in order to properly handle the different voltage requirements throughout the globe. Additionally, device and end user experience management. What's going to be your provisioning process? How are you going to provision these devices? How are you going to take that software and get it onto that hardware en masse? What happens if the end user accidentally or on purpose decides to factory reset that device? Does that mean all that provisioning and setup that you've done goes away? Does that profile that you set up on that device and that software that you put on it, does it persist? Can it somehow be automatically redeployed? These are the things that you need to be thinking about. You need to work with a partner that can help you provide a solution for that. Security strategy. What if the device is rooted? Can your software respond accordingly? Will the device do something about it being rooted? What if the solution that you're building has some confidential data, some proprietary information? At the very least, assume that it does. Then you need to be thinking about the security strategy. What happens if the device is rooted? Will it let your software know? Can your software respond, or does a device have logic built into it that will actually prevent secured data or de-encryption of data that's already been encrypted? Hardware integration. What if you wanted your device, the hardware, to tie into your software in a strategic and a specific way? Think purpose-built device. I want to ensure that the volume button that I have on my device, every time I press it, will launch my app. How easy is it to set something like that up? Does it require third-party solutions that have additional costs and services to them? You have to think about that as well. The approach that OEMs are taking, they attempt to purchase devices from a variety of OEM sources. That's fine. Oftentimes, cost is driving a lot of those decisions. You know, you're looking for ways that you can get your product developed and meet the needs and expectations and solve the use cases that you've set out to do, but you also have a cost constraint there. So oftentimes cost is driving this. But you have to consider the mantra of you get what you pay for. When you're thinking about cost and you're thinking about purchasing from a variety of OEMs, you can be faced with quality and durability issues. You know, is it a global brand? If it's not, if it's a smaller brand, check out the reputation of the product. Are they using cheaper materials to build their products? What's going to be the average lifespan of these devices? Customization limitations. Oftentimes, you don't have that level of granularity that's required to truly create this enhanced device and product experience. You can't go in there and easily do the things that I was sharing a bit earlier, remapping hardware buttons, quickly setting up kiosk mode, blacklisting and whitelisting applications, removing bloatware and other apps that aren't needed for your solution to work. Device provisioning processes are often complex. It's an often complex process and requires third-party tools with extra costs, licenses and services, and still doesn't give you the access to the lower levels of the device that you truly need to set up the device in the way that you need it. Also, software OS and version controls. What happens in a scenario where there's a new operating system update, but your app hasn't been tested and isn't ready? Are you able to hold that update off? Are you able to block it? These OEM providers might not give you that level of configuration that's required in order to have that kind of control, so that you can hold off updates and do things and then schedule an update for when your application has been certified to work with a specific operating system. So the solution to all this is Samsung devices. Now, one would think that just because we're at a Samsung conference and I work for Samsung, that I'm saying it for that reason. But honestly, Samsung devices are built with the enterprise in mind, literally from the ground up. At Samsung headquarters, and from the design perspective, these devices are literally have pieces and components that give you everything that we called out as challenges before. You have the granularity of controls. You can easily remap buttons. You can easily set up kiosk mode. You can do it through a variety of methods. We provide you cloud-based solutions that allow you to do that, but we also give you kind of lower levels through SDKs and APIs that allow you also to do the same thing there. Samsung obviously is a global brand with global compatibility. So that solves that whole voltage requirement thing that we were talking about. Samsung has devices that can work in any region of the world. So you don't have to be worrying about, if I purchase from this random OEM provider, will it work in Africa? Will it work in Asia? Will it work in the US? Will it work in all these other different places? Samsung's already solved that for you. Secured by Knox. Knox is approved by 29 governments throughout the globe. It's government-grade security. It not only provides you the secured perspective, but it also provides you some additional intelligence. We were talking about device rooting. If your device was to ever get rooted, based on the setup from the Knox security perspective, it'll literally lock off the key store that will prevent de-encryption of things that have been encrypted and stored on the device. It'll let your application know through an attestation call, and then your app can then respond accordingly, and you can then set up some type of plan and put that in place now that you know that device has been rooted. The provisioning process is a lot simpler, because we own the device and we've given you solutions and services that will allow you to actually perform the provision. So it definitely kind of reduces the friction that's required to build out these products in a way that will help to excel your vision. So let's talk about a few real world examples. I can go ahead and kind of stop talking and hand the microphone over to these esteemed gentlemen next to me. First thing we're going to talk about here is Medtronic. Jim introduced himself earlier. Jim, I'll go ahead and let you kind of talk a little bit about your solution. And,
Sounds good.
yeah.
Great. So Medtronic is, if you want to go to the next slide,
Yep.
Maurice, that'd be great. Medtronic makes devices like Samsung makes devices, right? The devices that we make are more like this. This is like a cardiac pacemaker, for example. But the division I work in essentially uses this kind of technology as a neurostimulator to essentially treat different conditions like incontinence, like Parkinson's disease, like chronic pain. But the same kind of thing is our engineers spend a lot of time putting a lot of smarts in the implantable device. But we also we've also made devices that have screens on it. This is a device that Medtronic made a number of years ago that, fundamentally, this doesn't look, it's got an old LCD screen on it, it's got some big buttons on it, it's not very usable and such. We're really good at these titanium devices and not so good at making devices with screens, right? So that's one of the key things that we did is that these implantable devices are very tailorable, very customizable to the individual patient. And so, like just everybody's different, the diseases that essentially occur inside everybody also causes the patient's response to be very different as well. And so these devices can be what we call programmed. It's not the programmer like you all think of programmers, right? But these devices are what we call programmers. And so physicians and nurses will use them when patients who get these devices go into the clinic, and they fine-tune and test them and adjust them. And then we also have programmers that patients have as well. And so they'll take something home and then be able to fine-tune and adjust their therapy as well. And so it's that kind of use case that we've had for many, many years, and we essentially wanted to get our engineers out of the business of making devices with screens and really tap into a company that's very, very good at that. And so that's really the kind of the case that essentially that we started with, Maurice. And so we decided to move to a commercial off-the-shelf platform and essentially went with a Medtronic, essentially with a Samsung, handset, and this is a device that essentially that Medtronic essentially sells in it that comes as a component with the system when the patient gets their implantable device and the hospital purchases that. And then we have got essentially custom, highly regulated medical device software that runs on these devices, and that gets all approved by the FDA, but the common platform underneath is essentially a commercial off-the-shelf Samsung handset, and so that's essentially, we essentially chose that device and chose Samsung for a number of key reasons. One was you mentioned about NOx. We don't use everything about NOx, but we use a number of key components of NOx. And on my team, I've got a digital connectivity team that helps our customers get their devices up and running and connected. And when they see the name Samsung, they usually feel a little better. A number of the hospital IT folks essentially are pretty familiar with NOx, and so that really helps in those conversations with them as well. And so that kind of security piece of it, as you can imagine, with devices like these that are making changes to a therapy that can impact someone's health, the security requirements and the sensitivity around security, it's going to be a pretty high requirement, both from our perspective, patients, physicians, hospitals, and the FDA as well. And so that was one of the key areas that really attracted us to working with Samsung. And then that element around how, that user interface that's intuitive and patients are likely already familiar with it, then using it essentially for the medical device applications, is a pretty easy step for them to go that direction. The last piece of it as well is an interesting one, is with our old device, imagine pulling this out of your pocket. Someone's going to look at that and say, well, what is that, right? It really calls attention, really, to it's kind of a unique device. It really calls that person out a bit. Whereas you pull out essentially a Samsung handset, that's a smartphone. It doesn't actually really, it allows that person to be discreet or really around how they interact with their medical condition and with their medical device. And if they want to share that they have a medical device, great. But the fact of using a Samsung handset actually allows them to be more discreet and allows them to be able to have more control, over that situation. And that's really important for a number of different conditions, including one which is around incontinence. We actually have a neurostimulator that treats incontinence, and that really has a lot of stigma to it and a lot of shame that goes with that condition, unfortunately, so patients who get those devices are really, really concerned about being very discreet with it as well. And so that's essentially our solution, is to be able and we've essentially had, let's see, we worked with Samsung and had 7 different releases over the last 2.5 years or so for various different therapies that treat various different conditions as well.
Okay. So you mentioned that you guys were manufacturing those devices yourself.
Yes, correct. Yep.
Yep. And then transitioned from that device to leveraging that Samsung, is that a J3?
Yes, exactly. And the one thing we had to do is there's the way our devices communicate with the outside world is with a proprietary radio frequency telemetry. Essentially, it's a very short range communication capability. So there is an intermediate device until we can move to Bluetooth, for example. And so this is an example of how do we integrate a piece of hardware, which is a kind of a go between a translator from Bluetooth on the handset, to the proprietary kind of radio signal that essentially we use to communicate with the implantable device. And so that was a way that we essentially needed certain capabilities in that platform that allowed us to be able to translate that signal and then make the whole system work well together.
Okay.
Yeah.
So moving to the device kind of gave you some additional capabilities then that you might not have had kind of with that old proprietary hardware you were using before.
Correct, absolutely. And right now we're starting, clearly the apps that are on these devices are the ones that allow patients to adjust and control, the therapy in their implantable devices, but it's a smartphone, right?
Sure.
So it gives us a technology platform to be able to, I have digital health in my title, and so to be able to look at adding some really interesting applications, that can really help surround the patient in how they manage their disease and condition, and it's really an exciting platform to build on top of going forward.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So is that a dedicated device, or can it be used for other instances? Can you talk a little bit about kind of the user experience?
Yeah, it is a dedicated device. I would say that's how we're beginning, clearly. And part of that is because the kind of software that we have on here is fairly mission critical for the functioning of the implantable medical device. So we decided to walk before we run. Clearly, someone says, well, that means you have to have an extra smartphone in your pocket or in your purse. And in this case, the answer to that would be yes. But over time, I think there's some interesting opportunities to be able to go to more of a choose-your-own-device model, potentially, or even a bring-your-own-device model in the future. But because of the security and safety requirements around that, and around the ability to make sure that we know and understand exactly what's happening on this handset, we went with a dedicated solution initially.
And considering you guys are obviously in a regulated industry, can you speak to the importance of how security impacted your decision to partner with Samsung here?
Yeah, I mentioned the elements of NOx, right? And I mean, clearly we have an MDM that essentially controls those pieces as well, and our regulatory kind of requirements are the enormous amount of testing that we have to go through, and how do we handle updates in operating systems and those kinds of things, and that the solutions that we have available here to us allows us to really control that, so that when we've got new software updated and ready to be able to deploy, we're not essentially governed or dictated by a regular operating system that gets pushed. We actually have a lot of ability to be able to control that, which our engineers love to have. So.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what's next for Medtronic as it relates to leveraging Samsung technology? I know that you guys are responsible and have been doing a great job in treating so many different conditions. Are you looking to kind of expand this into some of the other areas?
We are, and so you'll actually hear, if you go to the keynote session tomorrow, there's I'm going to do a plug. I won't take the thunder away from you, but you'll hear something tomorrow about expanding that to another really critical condition that Medtronic treats. So.
Cool. I won't ask any further questions. We'll have to wait till tomorrow to hear more about that then. So awesome. Well, thank you very much.
Sure.
I really appreciate that, Jim. Thank you guys for that.
Yeah, thank you.
So we'll hand it over to Mr. Jeremy Balkin. We'll talk a little bit about HSBC and this historic case study you guys have worked on.
Thanks, Mo.
Absolutely.
And honored to be here with Jim. Huge respect for Medtronic. We were just talking before in the green room that a former CEO of his company, I had the pleasure to study under at the Harvard Kennedy School. So huge respect for the work they're doing, both for innovation but also for healthcare, which is a huge sector that we all have a vested interest in seeing as efficient and efficacious as possible. Another important sector, dare I say, is financial services. And my suspicion is there aren't many bankers or people from banking at this amazing collaboration of 5,000 or more developers and industries. And to me, there's only upside for financial services when it comes to innovation and partnering with technology companies, because candidly, the upside is there for everyone to see, because I think there's a perception in the marketplace, perhaps fair, that consumer finance is lagging in other industries when it comes to digitization and customer experiences, and that's why we're here doing what we're doing to change that. And in specifically with relation to the historic world-first deployment of wearable technology in a bank branch, which we were really proud to have led initially in a pilot, and obviously the pilot was so successful that we took it to a few other locations, not only in the US, but globally, and of course to take that from pilot to deployment, which maybe we'll talk a little bit about later. Suffice it to say, if I can sort of paraphrase something a little bit that Jim said, talking about the external customer that essentially they're designing products for, we have that customer focus also. Where we did this historic wearables case study was for the internal customer, our employee. Because I think if you think about the two elements to that coin of the customer, what type of customer, we want to make sure that our people have the tools they need to be as efficient, productive, safe as possible. And candidly, I think one of the areas of opportunity for corporate America is to become exponentially more efficient on the inside, to give employees everywhere, frankly, more utility, more satisfaction, better engagement, to do more with less, to do more with more, to do more with better, with the tools they need to candidly be much more efficient in this hyper-digitized world we live in. And one of the observations that I guess I've seen is that corporate America, and certainly in consumer-facing banking, the traditional communication devices, and you can almost go to any branch to see this, is essentially tethered to a thing. That telephone is tethered to a desk, that computer is tethered to a wall or a desk, but customers want to be served when, where, and how they choose. And in our flagship branch in Manhattan, and everyone's welcome to come and visit it, right across the road from the public library on Fifth Avenue, that we have had a bank branch there at HSBC since in the 60s, when Senator Bobby Kennedy cut the ribbon on the opening. And when I joined HSBC in 2015, I saw that photo. It was in black and white. The only difference for the photo in 2015 at the time was that it was just color versus black and white. Nothing had changed. So you can imagine the design was imperfect for a modern retail experience. It was over 3 floors, 25,000 square feet. We had a bank vault, buried under a lot of concrete. That had some challenges in and of itself. So therefore, how could we deploy a technology to improve communications, first and foremost, within our staff ecosystem, that was tethered to them, so customers could be served when, where, and wherever they were in the branch and however they chose. So could we optimize communication within our team? And if we could optimize communication, could we increase staff productivity? Could they serve more customers in less time, more customers in more time, cut out some of the sort of the dead weight and latency that comes through traditional communications that makes them inefficient and delivers a bad customer experience? Third, could we therefore reduce customer waiting times through that efficiency? And finally, there was a security feature that we embedded that I perhaps might not talk about too publicly, but that came from the design thinking sessions with our frontline staff, is not only were they very interested to embrace this new technology that they thought was cool and exciting and engaging, but it was like, can this also make us safer? And so that there was credit to the Samsung team, who came back to us with a bunch of ideas, and we got there to a really nice equilibrium point with that feature. And I think, coming back to some of the problems we wanted to solve, here we are in corporate America, our people, it doesn't matter what industry we're in, our people are going home at night using these amazing tools and technology in their personal lives, and then they're coming back to work the next day, and perhaps it's not the same experience. And that has an impact on employee engagement, employee morale, recruitment, retention, a whole lot of other metrics that, by the way, has a cost. There's a sunk cost there. There's an opportunity cost of those inefficiencies, and other aspects, which probably in itself is another panel. But with regards to the historic nature of deployment, why is it that a bank's doing this? Why are we leading? Why are we the first? I mean, candidly, the application for wearables across corporate America is significant in a whole bunch of other areas we could talk about offline, to have a much bigger impact at scale in different varieties of industries. And when we started at our flagship branch in Manhattan to solve some of those challenges I mentioned earlier, and then we soon went to another branch location during the trial period in Manhattan to try a different architecture, different design, to see if the same premise could hold true in a branch that was perhaps more modern design, that didn't have some of those challenges that the flagship branch had. My colleagues in Dubai at HSBC deployed the same Samsung solution at the digital customer service branch that I've personally visited. I was in Malaysia, I think 3 or 4 or 5 months ago for a global meetup of 30 different retail markets. There was so much interest in our pilot here in the US that I was showing literally 30 markets at once, the Samsung solution. And I think what's really important to note is that during the 6-month initial pilot period, the results were staggering to say the least. And if you compare the 6-month period where we did the pilot to the same 6-month period a year before and the same 6-month period the year before that, and you took the average of the 2 years, we saw a 45% increase in new account openings over that time. And what's really important to remember is that when you can give your staff back more time through increased efficiency, they can be more productive. And so if you just picture the scenario, a customer walks in off Fifth Avenue. Now, I'm from Australia, but I've learned pretty quickly living in New York. Every minute matters. Every minute's like a day if customer has to wait for something. By the way, 4 minutes is industry best practice for consumer banking, waiting in a line. That's like 4 years in Manhattan on a busy day. So a customer walks in off Fifth Avenue, they get greeted by a wonderful staff member. They might have an appointment with someone who's downstairs or upstairs, for example. By the time you've checked in and the person greeting them unlocks one of the 27 different passwords to unlock their laptop, to then send that email to the person, the advisor, or the relationship manager. They might be in another meeting. By the time they've unlocked their device to find out their customer's even there, minutes are ticking by. It's a terrible customer experience. In addition to that, it's also suboptimal to then for one of our people to take out their mobile device and quickly try to quickly call them on their cell phone, because that breaks the eye contact and that bond between the customer and the employee by having this device in front of them. So with the wearable, not only you can keep eye contact with your customer, but with preset messages such as your appointment is here, your customer is here, with a turn of a bezel, preset message either to one staff or to all staff, for example, and then all of a sudden the employee, in the case of an appointment being here, could simply reply, "Great, I'm on the way." Another preset message, simple. I'm 2 minutes late, 5 minutes late, or I'm busy. That interaction back and forth is in a fraction of a second. We're not talking minutes now anymore. It's a fraction of a second, and we can tell the customer, Maurice is on his way. Would you like to take a seat? Can we get you a coffee? You manage an expectation completely differently. Any more than the fact, one of the most interesting things we found is not only could you send preset messages on the device, you could actually make a phone call. And I mentioned the amount of concrete that our building was built under. That also creates security challenges because traditional cell phones don't work, and cell phone coverage. So with the Galaxy device, you have advanced LTE capabilities with a micro SIM card. One of the first things some of our younger team members did, maybe as a gag, went down to the vault, made a phone call through the watch to one of the other team members upstairs. And guess what? It worked when the cell phone didn't. So you then think about trust in the technology. All of a sudden, and that, by the way, wasn't even the security feature we embedded, just to be clear. That was just a practical use case in an event of enhanced security. The amount of trust of our people and increased adoption was just incredible since then, because they realized that there was other benefits that perhaps they hadn't even factored in. And so it's just been a really great case study where we've seen such positivity and engagement beyond the results that I mentioned earlier, that we've gone from pilot, we're rolling it out and deploying it at a number of branches across the country. That's sort of the roadmap for the year ahead. And I would just simply say that, what are other industries doing? Corporate America, there's so much opportunities for wearables to improve the employee experience. And if you improve the employee experience, then you're going to improve the customer experience.
Sure.
And I think that's one of the messages to be left with today. And with all the developers out there, my call to action, if I may, is keep thinking about developing for wearables, but please keep thinking about banking. It's maybe not the top industry that's on your list. Maybe it should be, because the opportunity is there, and there's not a lot of competition right now. So get in there early, and let's talk.
There we go. So a couple of questions for you. It's kind of a contrast, I believe, from what Jim was sharing with the Medtronic experience. You know, they already had kind of a process in place. They leveraged Samsung technology to replace existing hardware because that hardware model wasn't working for them. You guys really didn't have any process in place, right? You brought technology in to kind of pull some things together and create kind of a new paradigm internally. Can you talk a little bit about that experience? You know, what was the adoption, how things look from, you know, from that perspective?
It's a great question, Mo, because in some ways, it's both an opportunity and a threat by when you don't have a body of evidence or history or case study to work off, and you're the guinea pig in a way, then it creates additional responsibility and so on and so forth. But I think one of the reasons one of the key things we wanted to really build into this deployment was anyone can go get a wearable from Best Buy, right? That's great. But we wanted something that was enterprise grade. We wanted to work with a company that was going to customize it for our needs. Banking is a bit like healthcare. It's highly regulated. It's unique. It's got a whole series of complexities that other industries probably don't appreciate or have to deal with. So we wanted something that was enterprise grade, customized, a team that was prepared to work with us and push our limits of what we thought was possible and challenge us. And in addition to that, be able to work at a pace and legitimate agility to be responsive to our needs. And in every aspect, not only did the team at Samsung, and Gary's probably somewhere here, and I say thank you to him and the extended crew, not only did Samsung meet that expectation, they exceeded that expectation and took us to a whole new area of opportunity that we never even thought possible. There were times when our teams, like on my world, would be like, hey, like we were talking to Samsung so much, it wasn't like another company. It felt like just one big family that we were all just working together and ideating for the benefit of our employees who were our customer in this example. So, it's just been amazing. And again, I would just encourage more collaboration. The one thing financial services as an industry needs to do is continue to be open, not only to ideas, but to outside companies to partner and to deliver a better customer experience.
Sure. Awesome. Thank you. Now, from the ideation perspective, right, how'd you guys come up with the idea, the use case? What drove you to want to go into this path? I know that you kind of have these two different segments of customers, the internal and the external. Was there kind of a voice of the customer that drove that? What was the driving factor that pushed you down this path to innovate your environment the way you did?
So, I think a lot about the future of work. And I know it's a cliche, but I don't think a lot of people actually are thinking about the future of work or doing something about it. So I think a lot about what the employee experience is going to look like, and not in 30 years' time, today, because what happens today will shape what happens in 30 years' time, for example. And I mean, there's also some structural shifts happening in the economy around productivity and so on and so forth, and humans and machines working together, not humans working for machines. Like, there's a lot of things I think we need to address as a society. In addition to that, about 6 months earlier, my team, we made history again, putting the world's first consumer-facing robot. And that was, probably one of the crazier ideas, but it was so successful that then the teams were like, hey, what are you going to do for us? That's great for customers. What are you going to do for us? So that's why the wearables, the timing was perfect, because actually I've been thinking about wearables longer than I've been thinking about robotics. And actually, because of the success of if putting a robot for customers is like way out there on the spectrum of like craziness, everything beyond that is just much more normalized. So if that was successful, then the willingness to adopt and work with us on wearables, and candidly, wearables was almost, everyone in our branch had some sort of wearable device anyway, so it wasn't like it was some abstract concept.
Sure.
It was kind of taking their personal life, like a technology they take for granted and use in their personal life, and then deploying that in the work environment, and actually that level of embracing the change actually motivated them, because like, wow, we're getting a better tool, and we're first. So that's a first they could say in their career and be part of making history. So that was a lot of the level of engagement. And then when they saw the results, productivity increases, security, safety, et cetera, it just continued to snowball in this way. And we designed the pilot initially with privacy in mind, and particularly the privacy of our team. 30 days later into this trial, we had a session with Samsung to kind of interview the team and get their feedback. First thing the team wanted to change, they wanted to track steps and health data of the team, and they wanted to in their lunch breakout room, they wanted to have on the board, they wanted to have a competition who was moving the most and have a team step goal, which was like, well, we wanted to retain your privacy, and they were saying, no, we're happy to give it up because we actually think it's going to benefit us, which is consistent with, there's a great report to read, this has come out recently from Accenture around employee data, and 92% of American employees are happy to sacrifice their data if it's used in a responsible way where they get a benefit as an employee, and this was absolutely consistent with what we saw. So it's just been tremendous.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So one final question for each of you. So can you speak to the importance of having Samsung as a partner throughout the process? Jim, if you don't mind kind of going first, it wasn't a scenario where we just dumped a bunch of J3s at your doorstep and said, go figure it out. Sounds like there was some level of collaboration between Medtronic and Samsung to drive
we had significant collaboration. Right. We've been working with Samsung, I think, for over 7 years now, from kind of the early conversations to when we shifted into fairly significant kind of development mode, both planning, strategy, development, and then the kind of the execution side of things as well. So, so we've had lots of contact from our engineering teams, from the business and marketing side of things, which is where I'm at, from our operations side of things as well. So there's all kinds of, and the coordination. And so I think, it's interesting. Medtronic, large company, Samsung, large global company as well, right? And so, but we run at different speeds. You all are pushing, new products out every year, right? Whereas, implantable devices, a fast cycle for us might be like a really fast cycle is like 3 years, right? And sometimes it's 5 years out, that piece of it. And so we had to figure out, actually, from a culture perspective, how to be able to work together, right? And so we did a lot of learning early on around how does Samsung like to work, how does Medtronic like to work, and then how do we meet in the middle, right? And they push us, which we really appreciated, and then we also pushed Samsung as well. And so I thought there was a very strong collaboration and I would say a willingness on the side of Samsung to say, hey, we're in this, okay? We're in this together, as partners here, and let's see how we can make it work.
Awesome, thank you. Jeremy?
I think in some ways, to sort of echo Jim's point, the history of HSBC and the history of Samsung, two major global corporations that started well over 100 years ago in both cases in Asia, to the organizations that we are today. So there's a lot of symmetry in the history and the journey. And we have many touch points with Samsung, whether it's the fact of another project that my team led. We built something called the HSBC Financial Wellness Center around financial literacy. Samsung was actually the first company to put that on their intranet, the white labeled for Samsung, but it's the HSBC Financial Wellness Center. We've obviously got a proud history. Many of the devices, the corporate devices are Samsung devices for the bank. And so why not wearables? I think it's just another evolution of beyond like Samsung Pay and other things that we've integrated for our customers. Like, why not wearables?
Right.
And so that's why when it came to one of the points I made earlier about just the level of engagement and the teams, there really were times where we just felt we all worked in the same place because we were so interactive with each other and we spent so much time together. When Gary comes and visits, he knows Ken, our branch manager. They're all on first name terms, and I think that says a lot about the values of an organization and the culture, the strength of the culture, and the willingness to continue to collaborate and embrace change, but work together, right? A lot of innovation is around the intersection between industries, different products, services. We're open to best ideas. We want to work with folks from the outside because our customers expect it. And we've happily to lead financial services in some of the stuff we've done, but there's much, much more to be done.
Awesome.
Maurice, can I add one other thing?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, the other
please.
thing that we leveraged with Samsung was your relationship with AT&T. AT&T acts as an integrator for us, with this solution, and so that was another kind of side benefit is that Medtronic didn't necessarily have those kinds of relationships, with those kind of partners, and And you've got really strong relationships with those kind of partners, and so that was something that we really have leveraged, quite a bit. So.
Awesome, great to hear. Thank you guys again very much for that. We really appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you.
That final question was kind of posed on purpose because, again, at the very beginning of the session, we wanted to convey the message that Samsung acts as a partner. And I think what we heard from two different industries and also two different form factors, we have smartphone and wearable, kind of showing you that Samsung is not just going to drop a bunch of watches off at your doorstep, a bunch of phones, a bunch of tablets, and say, go figure it out. We're willing to go and partner with you to build out these solutions. We've done it, in multiple industry verticals throughout the globe. We continue to do that. There is one more that I want to cover, covering the tablet form factor. I'll kind of close out with this because we only have 4 minutes left, and then we want to make sure that there's some room for questions. So this one is personalized workouts. Nautilus builds Bowflex. The Max Trainers and quite a few other, very, very high quality equipment. They also have a commercial line, Octane Fitness, and a lot of health clubs. They wanted to leverage Samsung technology and build out a custom purpose-built health-oriented or fitness-oriented device. So in similar fashion as what was described by these two gentlemen, and I actually worked on this project, we embedded ourselves with the Nautilus team. We spent time at their headquarters out in Portland, Oregon, out there a few times a month, days, a week at a time, truly kind of getting an understanding of what they were looking to accomplish. And then we built out this kind of highly customized version of one of our Samsung tablets, which integrates directly into the Max Trainer. If you go onto Nautilus's website, or if you go into Samsung Insights, our site where we kind of have all our business cases listed, you'll see a lot of detail about it. But some of the things to note about it was that the tablet itself can act as a user interface. So literally, as you're working out on the device, all the normal metrics that you would see as to steps, that your incline, all the other data that's actually generally presented to you through the console would now be presented through the device. But it's layered with Nautilus's artificial intelligence platform. So it actually takes that data, builds it into the platform, persists it out into the cloud, and now if you go from workout machine to workout machine, or do some level of working out and your watch tracks it, all of that then gets fed into this back end, and it creates this entire fitness-oriented profile that can go with you from machine to machine. So this is definitely something that, again, helps to convey the message that, we're more than just the creator of some of the coolest technology that's in the market today, but Samsung is definitely an OEM partner. What we want to do now is leave it for questions. We have a couple of minutes left. So if you guys do happen to have a few questions, especially for these gentlemen here, feel free to come up to the microphone. In the meantime, there's a slide up here that kind of conveys a few other items that might be of value to you. We have some online resources. This is a developer session, so if you go to developer.samsung.com, you can kind of see some of the tools that we have out there to help jog you down the path of development. A couple of other sites here are partner, Samsung Knox, developer.tizen.org, that's for building apps for wearables. We have a few hackathons coming up. One is in Seattle in a few weeks. I'll be at that one if anyone is in the Seattle area, and another one coming up in Austin in December. And we do something called Jump Starts, where members of our team can literally come on site and spend time with your developers and help to train them up on how to build solutions that tie into the powerful components of our ecosystem. We can teach your developers how to build watches or watch applications leveraging Tizen, teach them how to build solutions that tie into the Knox SDK. And also check out the Samsung Mobility Platform, the B2B app development launchpad. That's tomorrow. That's going to be hosted by one of our teammates. And other than that, if you have any questions, feel free to come on up. But also note this: if you enjoyed today's session, please rate it. Maybe we can mute this from the video. We're going to lock the doors until everyone rates this a 10. No, I'm just kidding. But yes, thank you guys very much. We have a few seconds left, so if there are any questions, feel free to pose them. If not, we definitely appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Yep, looks like we got a question here. Thank you.
Hi, the question's for Jim.
Yeah.
Did you find that the FDA, like your replacement cycles, is the FDA easy to work with, even though it wasn't like the product wasn't specifically designed, at least I don't think it was, for the medical market
Right.
segment?
No, it's a great question. We have a regulatory affairs team, within Medtronic, and so they actually worked with the FDA, and actually the FDA has some guidance out there around using commercial off-the-shelf devices because they've been working with Medtronic and other companies because we've been pushing them to be able to do this. And so early on, there was a lot of, I would say, groundbreaking work that our regulatory affairs team did in bringing the FDA along around kind of what are we doing, why are we doing it, what's the rationale, how do we separate kind of the highly regulated pieces to the non-regulated commercial side of things as well, and they bought into that strategy, and now there's actually published FDA guidance around the use of commercial off-the-shelf devices, and it's risk-based. Highly risky things, right? Unless you've got something really controlled and locked down, right? I mean, that's, versus something in that risk spectrum, the FDA is often driven by that risk analysis piece of it. So that's a big factor into where you would fall on that spectrum of absolutely, use a commercial off-the-shelf solution versus, no, this is something that's kind of life-critical, mission-critical, and it may not be a candidate for that. So, yeah, sure.
Any other questions? All right, that's it.
All right.
We have reached the conclusion. Thank you guys very much for attending today's session. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.